Hey there, everybody. Anybody watching later or watching live? So today, obviously a big day. Scarlet Twilight 4 is launching on Zoop, doing off to a great start. We also have the hardcover collection that's going to collect 1 through 4 with a ton of extra content. Is also part of this campaign, as well as some ways to catch up with if you missed issue 2, 3, 1, whatever. Those are also offered digital variants, all sorts of formats there. So if you're interested and you've missed it, please give that a look because I think you'll really like it. 4 is just about done. I have 3 pages to go. And I think, boy, if you liked 1, I think you're really going to like 4. I couldn't be happier with how it's turning out. But just kind of to do something for launch day, I had a little bit of time here and wanted to do a quick stream where maybe I just went back through number 1 and shared some thoughts on what was going on with some of the plot points there, how it's been carried through in the later issues, and hopefully give anyone who's interested a peek into the creative process there. So, obviously, if you guys have been following me, you're probably pretty familiar with this image. This was pretty hard to come up with, actually, given how simple it is. I wanted, um, it's one thing to draw something that's just going to look cool, which I hope this does, but it's another thing to think of, boy, I'm launching this Kickstarter. I'm not really a known quantity. Don't have much, many credits to my name, and think of something that's really got to sell the whole story in one image. So this, I think, did a pretty good job. I like I obviously like all the Art Deco trappings, and the main character turned out pretty well. And I think I was lucky to have hit upon this here and get an image that I think worked pretty simply and sold the story. I wish I could find it. I had one old, like I think it was a German World's Fair poster or something like that from 1920. That was really what I looked at and said, "Oh, that's kind of what I want to do." It looked pretty crazy and abstract, to be honest. I don't know that you'd see it and would connect it to this image, but that kind of was my where it clicked. I thought, okay, cool. I could show him in this scale, show the city, get kind of this Fleischery light effect behind it, have room for that, do something interesting and more modern with the Scarlet Twilight logo, which was another thing I wanted to do. And while that is, the one thing I wanted with that was for it to kind of tell that this was a not completely just a throwback sort of thing. It was going to be a little bit postmodern, and that not definitely not like a deconstruction like you'd see with some characters, but that it wasn't just going to be a recreation of a golden age comic. And there was actually, I think, a shadow comic or something called the Avenger that had a pretty similar logo in the 30s. So definitely seen things like this on things that aren't modern, but I think that kind of came together pretty well and told the story. The variant cover was fun to do. I looked at a lot of artwork from the early golden age, stuff like that. The artist I really looked at a lot was Jerry Robinson. I don't think I really had appreciated his work. I obviously kind of knew his contributions to the Batman mythos, creating Robin and the Joker, were mostly what I knew him for. But in doing some research, dug up some original artwork scans on Heritage Auctions of his stuff. And I have to say, looking at it close and in black and white, he's a lot stronger than I ever, gave him credit for. I always, as a kid, liked Dick Sprang's stuff. A little cartoonier. It was a little more polished. And I looked at Jerry Robinson's and Bob Kane's stuff is not as good. Those were the sort of not as good versions of those old stories. But looking at Jerry Robinson's covers, I should have dug up some of those. And maybe I'll do another cover stream where I just kind of go through what I ended up with for these regular variant covers and the influences that really got me there. Because his work is a lot more solid in terms of anatomy than I had really noticed. His shading and feathering is really cool. And that was a big inspiration directly, and kind of how I'm doing some of this rendering here is not obviously what I normally do, but that came right out of looking at Jerry Robinson's work and seeing how they'd sit down and approach those things back in the day. So this was a lot of fun to do. It's not quite crazy about the colors. I don't feel like that quite came together like I wanted it to, but at some point you just got to say, oh, all right, move on to the next one. And that's what I did. So looking back, I like it a lot more than I did at the time. But yeah, this was a fun experiment, and I think it worked out pretty well. Had all my backer pages. This was, I obviously committed to thanking everyone at the outset of the first campaign and making sure that appeared in the book. I don't know if I would have done that had I known how many people there'd be, which I hope doesn't sound like too much of a humble brag, but I always felt a little bad that now I sort of have to send out 4 pages of words to people that wanted to read stuff like this. It's not quite as I was expecting. This is my first image of Captain Lancet, aside from the concept sketches I'd drawn of him. That was another one that was pretty tough to come up with. That costume took a long time to land on. I was using some, I was looking at all those old Golden Age comics. I was thinking about what might be, something that says standard, but, heroic character. It didn't fall into too many modern trappings. And this did it eventually, I think. But when I was starting out, I had, a lot of those characters with the high collars, the domino masks, things like that. And it was just really not working out. I was lucky that I had a Frank Lloyd Wright window pattern on my artboard, sort of as inspiration. And I was planning on using that as kind of something that would be inspiration for a texture that you might see on this part of his uniform, and had it set to multiply and mirrored it. And instead of it just mirroring the existing image, it copy and pasted one in front that I didn't realize was there and had an overlay. And that was produced a shape that was a lot like what you see on Captain Lancet's uniform here. So that was a nice accident. As soon as I saw that, I kind of drew over it, came up with something that worked. And from there, it was pretty easy. But it took a long time to arrive at that point. Had a pretty big info dump on this first page here. I hope it's fun. If you're going to do that, I feel like it's necessary at times, but maybe, I sort of thought, okay, I'm going to have to throw all these word balloons out there, but maybe the radio thing is a fun way to do it. And I hope it was. And go straight from there to these bad guys on watch. I think I forgot the color of this hand, or something happened on one of the files when I was fixing it. But I know I redrew that gun like 3 times because I hated how it looked. But yeah, maybe I'll have to go back and fix that. So introduce those guys via this phone call here, and the word balloons get a look at our villainess, but obviously we can't see quite who she is. I don't think it's too much of a mystery when you're reading the book to sort of when she appears. I would think most people that have gotten back to me have said, yeah, it was really obvious who she ends up being. But use this to kind of set up our villains and heroes in our first fight scene. Just have him kind of perched up in the rafters like Batman and Daredevil tend to be. Started using kind of this. I don't think I went back to this too often. I'm going to try and use it a lot more in the sequel to Scarlet Twilight, which I'm calling Cobalt Crisis. And this Leyendecker or JC Leyendecker style shading, where you get these little, parallel, perpendicular to your shading sort of brush things there. I'm trying to figure out a way to do that because I want to approach it a lot differently in the next one, where I want to make it much more like a Golden Age comic. I want to make sure the layouts are a lot more dynamic than the Golden Age comic generally were. So we still have that going for it. But with this, I kind of took a lot of those things, and I think I, at least artistically, veered to the side that was more modern. And I think going forward in this next one, I think it'll serve the story a lot more if I was sort of 60-40 modern to be 60-40 retro. So I want to try and avoid using any of these color holds, which I use in a lot of times just to cheat a little bit and make things a little bit clearer than they would be otherwise. But I'm really trying to keep myself honest, not use any of that in the future. But I do want to try and bring in some things like this type of rendering. And I can show you a little bit of this cover for what's going to be Cobalt Crisis. Kind of finding ways to do that in the rendering here. A few artists do something like that. I think Cully Hamner renders a little bit like that sometimes. And I'm trying to find a way to integrate that because I want to simplify the style just a little bit, make it a little less loud and less painterly. I do want to keep doing the sort of amount of shading I've been doing. I think that's finally worked out pretty well. And I'm finishing up 4. Where I'm at now, I feel like that finally clicked. I kind of realized I didn't draw too much of Captain Lancet's uniform. I kind of went back to what I was doing here, where I'd render the dark parts of his uniform in the face, and then do all the rendering for the red and color parts in the color, just to give it a little bit extra pop. Alex Ross does in some of his stuff. He'll leave really flat areas on, like when he's drawn Captain Marvel or the old Kingdom Come Superman, and I really dug that. I like leaving those kind of bold color areas. I think that plays to a lot of the color that you see in older comics. Just kind of has a real good, pure comics vibe to it. So moving forward, that's what I'm trying to do a lot more of. And this is up here something I'm proud of, and I don't know if I've gone into it too much, but one thing I really like doing was these word balloons where they have the reversed initial letter there. That I think I saw in some old Batman comics and instantly thought, boy, I got to do that. It's really cool. So obviously, I think most of you probably have read this, but he kind of jumps down. This unfolds like a very standard comic book scene. We have some 1960s Batman trap sort of sprung on him. And this was a lot of trouble. It was fun, but kind of hard to orchestrate because I kind of have my character lying to us here a little bit, in that he's acting like he's afraid of the gas. And we're going to find out in a few pages he's not, whether that gas is super effective or not, it's not going to be a big problem for him. And in fact, a lot of his MO is built to conceal the fact that anybody who gets away would know that he's a vampire, which we'll see in a page or two. So he's here, he's trapped, the room's being flooded with gas. I think there was an old Batman comic with a guy named Dr. Death where he would go nuts and have this kind of pose, and he would say, "Haha, you fool." Really silly stuff. But I wanted to throw some of that in there because I really just dug. Those old comics have such a cool atmosphere to them. Sometimes the color is a little overdone or there's too much of it. Obviously, they didn't have anything like the tools we have today. So I'm not criticizing that as such, but there's something that, with all the weaknesses that I think are inherent to comics being a new art form, for the technology being what it was, there's something that shines through those old comics that you do not get today, or even, in the late 40s and 50s. It had kind of something about that pulpy roughness really, really shown. I've always liked that, even though when I'd sit down and read some of the little comics, I'd be a little underwhelmed. It would be silly. The layouts would be crammed into these sometimes more than 9-panel grids. And you'd get like a pretty standard set of panel layouts and things like that. So that's kind of something I wanted to see if I could try and keep the pulpiness without, some of the other things. And I don't know how well I did on that front. I feel like I didn't quite push it as golden age as I'd wanted to. But the next project will have an opportunity to do that. So here we kind of see this guy laughing at him. He's giving us a little bit of exposition about his whole deal. And Captain Lancet shoots his rays, which are kind of a silly old ray gun type thing. And we're going to find out that he's acting like that, made the gas inert or something like that. But ultimately, it's just a light show and kind of a prop. And we kind of see also that he's able to jump bigger than you'd think anyone really could, and hops up there. And I wanted this panel to be really, I hope it's not dull, but I wanted it to be the least creative, dynamic layout it could be. And I think that works out good for the storytelling. We're just simply saying, hey, he's above these clouds of gas now. He's jumping higher than you'd think someone could normally. And then this is kind of a setup to have a really not dynamic panel and go right into what I think is a pretty dynamic panel right after this. Kind of a Zack Snyder slow motion type of a deal. And then, of course, we get this guy here. Some of the gas gets in and he's reacting to it. But hopefully we don't dwell on it too much because we've got a lot of action about to start over here. This guy's a little scared. This dude's a lot bigger. He's ready to throw down, have a fight. And this is something that I really enjoyed when I started laying this issue out, doing my page count stuff, figuring out what would go where. I've discovered that a really good tool I had in my arsenal was the way that these Golden Age comics went through the story. They would sometimes just say, and then this happened, and now Batman's on the other side of town. And that seems silly. And I think that you could play it for humor. And I think I do in a few points. But the nice thing is, I thought, well, that's kind of good. As much as you maybe somebody could say, oh, that was abrupt. I'd probably rather see something abrupt than see the character try and find a taxi, get across town. You know, want to skip over the boring parts. It's a comic book, especially in a first issue. Page counts are really precious. There's so much to cover when you're setting up your world and your rules and your characters that it was a real benefit to just be able to say, you know, this fight lasted 3 panels. We kind of understand if it's handled in a montage way. I hope that it lasted a few minutes. It's not, these aren't like the only punches that were thrown, but that really enabled me to cover a lot of ground and not eat up a lot of pages. Because I don't really want to, in addition to just not wanting to waste the space, I think it's a kind of a long time to spend with a scene like this. So that I think when you look at the overall pacing and stuff like that, it's kind of fun to be able to say, I want to cover this. I want to dip into this and dip out so that you're not bored or comfortable in this scene by the time something new happens. And of course, something new is about to happen. So he's, down on the canvas a little bit. Doesn't look too worried. And he's kind of giving them this very Adam West Batman speech that they laugh at. And one of the things that I really wanted to do with this series was establish sort of how for real Captain Lancet was. So I think there's probably, I was trying to put my thumb on the scale a little bit to maybe make you think he's nuts or he's doing this as a smokescreen of some kind, especially when you see what happens in a couple of pages. But ultimately, I wanted to make it so that Captain Lancet was the good guy that you think he is or that he presents himself as. I think when you read stories like this with superheroes, you want them to be heroes. I think ultimately, it's not to say that something like Watchmen isn't awesome. I like that stuff, but at the end of the day, I think when you like superheroes and that kind of truth, justice, and the American way type stuff, I don't want to get too deconstructionist about that. I don't want to, oh, look, pull the curtain back and here's this guy's problems and all that stuff. I kind of want to see them be heroic. And I think the fun in this series was to give you a lot of reasons to see why he's maybe not heroic and then explain his opinions and his objectives in a way that I think makes at least comic book sense that he is a hero. He's a good guy and has the right intentions and all that stuff. So this, we go through these guys laughing. And this is something I spend as much time on this laughter as I really do in the fight. But I think that is the type of thing I was talking about with the pacing is I kind of want that to be, look at these guys, they're laughing at them. I want that to be as impactful as the other stuff in terms of what you're kind of absorbing as a reader. So I think that was, again, having that Golden Age toolkit a little bit to just fast forward through some things really lets me do that. And I think sets up this moment so much better. One thing this is something I've never done before with black type in a lighter colored value stroke around it. There was a poster for, I think, The Public Enemy with James Cagney that was on one of the streaming services I was going through that had the type like that. That looked great. And I instantly thought, oh, that's what I got to do here. And I think that balanced out pretty well with the values and the shading on this henchman and the doctor here. So he asks a question like, wait, how did you use your ray gun to counteract gas, which seems like a stupid thing. And as it turns out, sort of is. Is he, after looking back at the villains a little determined for a second, goes and pulls a Mortal Kombat move on this guy and tears his heart out and is pretty nonchalant about it. He's looking at the blood and talking about, the blood type. The doctor is freaking out. Things have obviously taken a bad turn for him. This was a panel I really struggled with. This did not look good for the longest time. I was about to redraw the whole thing. And then I knew I wanted to put speed lines in. It's not like I just threw them in to kind of cover it up. But once I thought, do I just scrap this now or just see it through with the speed lines and see if it works any better? And To my surprise, I think it looks great with the speed lines. That's one of my favorite images in the whole book. The color really complemented that. It reminds me a little bit of not Frank Cho, Michael Cho's work. He's probably most well known for those Silver Age collections. They're hardcover, really nice, sort of retro tinged illustrations. But I think he'll do stuff like this with color every now and then. I might have been looking at that, and I thought doing some of these in the foreground and a sort of blurred effect, and in the background with the sound effect, I thought turned out great. I was shocked because I was just about ready to not see this through and scrap it, and like I said, it turned out to be one of my favorites. So again, was able to use a little bit more quiet time here to focus on these blood plops and stuff like that. And that's just to slow things down a little bit, make sure that we're kind of stuck in this quiet moment with the doctor losing it, and then he gives his speech. And well, this was all a smokescreen. I didn't really, my ray guns don't work. They're a bit of a prop. And explains his whole deal is he's a vampire and wants to make sure that people give you every chance to surrender and do the right thing before he does his vampire thing. So he turns into sort of his vampire form. And I thought this was another thing where I wanted this image to be a splash image. Obviously, these characters are facing each other. It wouldn't make sense. I didn't think this would work, but I decided to mock up a sketch just to see if it did. And I thought, yeah, it kind of does. I like that this is one image that I'm looking at one moment and not a panel up here of this guy and a panel down here of this guy. Somehow, I think through the magic of comics, this just kind of worked out for me. So I threw out a little bit of this is a bit of an homage to the sort of cover dress you'd see on a Saturday Morning Post, the Norman Rockwell stuff from back in the day. And it was just kind of intended to be, while I've got something really dark going on, this weird Americana, reference as a design element. So it was the thinking there. We kind of fade out on this guy losing it quietly, and then we assume that something bad has happened and see him jumping out of the building to get back to his driver. Go back to our henchmen here who just take off. Got to use some of this old terminology, beat feet. If you go through these old comics, they had a lot of silly, dialogue and things like that. That's kind of fun to play with when I can. Generally, I'll write my script, which I do on the page, and draw it out, and then I kind of refine my script while I'm doing the lettering. And at that point, I'll go through some of my I have a Batman collection of Golden Age stuff. I'll just go through and maybe 5 pages at a time, read 2 or 3 issues of that, see if there's any terms, weird, references that they'd make back in those old comics that I can use here. And beat feet was one of them. It's not something I've ever heard before, but I always wanted to throw that stuff in there whenever I could. Let me take a quick second to check on some notifications here. I'll make sure I'm keeping up on everything. Had a little bit of a break here in the day that I could use to do this live stream, but I also want to make sure nothing big is happening that I need to look into. And looks like we're okay. Nothing too big to do. Awesome. All right. I was afraid that something for my regular job, I need to jump through, and so I got to go off and do this now, but I think I'm all good for the time being. So we can keep doing Scarlet Twilight stuff. Anyway, we introduced Maxie, his driver. I based him on the character from the Shadow movie. I think Brian, what's that guy's name? It's not Brian Doyle Murray. Big guy. He was on Everybody Loves Raymond. Somebody will figure that out, hopefully. But he was the Shadow's driver, one of his sidekick guys that had the rings, who owed him, and needed to give him a little bit of a presence here so that when we have him play a much bigger role in the following issues, it wouldn't be out of the blue. You kind of see where he's come from. So I went through, did this. This is another thing that you could do in the Golden Age. You could just make a cool type panel. I don't know how, looking back, how happy I am with this type. I might mess with that someday. And that font is a little much. But, it's nice to be able to just say, and then they're here. So we show him going to this big time gala. I started doing this thing where I did the colors blurrier on crowd scenes that I really liked. Hopefully that doesn't come across as too lazy, but in a photo you wouldn't see that necessarily in sharp focus, and I think that really it gives you the right amount of detail and I guess focus is the word. Really focus on the sharp line that would be the skin tone versus the hair versus the clothes. That you get kind of this mishmash of shapes, and then the character that's supposed to be the focal point is in sharp focus color wise. I have a kind of a lame joke here about some blood on his cheek that somebody says, "Oh, you're out there. You have a lipstick on your mouth." And he has a little joke there. Oh, I can't get anything past you. And I also think if you guys have read three, you'll know who he really is. Um, I wanted a lot of things about him to be kind of silly. You have somebody who's claimed to be from Wallachia, who looks like I based him on Buster Crabbe, who was the Flash Gordon in the 1930s serials. And I think that was kind of a silly thing that you got in old movies. You get Errol Flynn being a cowboy in the Old West. They just would throw their stars into whatever genre was popular and they thought would make money, and didn't they would offer just the barest explanation on why this character didn't really fit to make it work. And that was the impetus to make him, this blonde haired, blue eyed guy, which is a little bit silly. And his name is also, I think, pretty silly, Vlad Kingsley, and he's a prince, almost as if he emigrated to America, although he didn't really in the Ellis Island days, and said, "What's your occupation?" You'd say king, and they say, "All right, Kingsley, get out of the line." So that was just meant to be a really dumb joke that also spoke to the simplicity of the concepts you'd see in some of these old things. So again, hopefully that worked. It's another thing that I didn't spend too much time on in the story. There's a lot of things I set up to specifically not to then focus on. I think when we look at the things that get introduced in number one, and then you go back and think, okay, how's this going to unfold? Part of the thing I wanted to play with was, there may be 5 or 6 open questions that you go forward with in the series from the end of issue one, and the fun of it to me was for you guys to see what I stick with and what doesn't end up the way that you think it will. So that was why I did some of those things. Kind of see who ends up being our villain this year. I don't know how obvious that was. I think it was pretty obvious. I hope it was. This scene took forever to draw, despite not being, a huge crowd scene. Boy, that sure took a long time to do. Looking back on it, I still feel, it was horrible. It turned out okay. I'm kind of glad how the color worked out. This is the kind of thing that I realized I needed more separation and through this color bleed behind him. But in Cobalt Crisis in the next series, I'm going to try and be a little more honest and avoid doing that. So we'll see how that works out. Have these panels here. He's trying to track down what's going on. He has some information that Satanica is going to be at this thing that he got from the doctor. And we introduce this princess who I hope seems like a villain. She's got these henchmen and all that stuff. And sends for Captain Lancet, wants to talk to him, or Vlad Kingsley. I think her idea, excuse me, is that, he's a prince too. And she knows that. And she says, I've been looking into this as well. And I think that people like us are their target. From what I found out, or what they've been hunting and harassing her, is it's vague, but it's kind of, she has some reason to be involved. The guards kind of take him there. I like this panel a lot, even though it's not a terribly flashy one. This color bleed worked out really well, I think. This lamp worked out cool. I like the composition. So that's one that took it probably took like 10 minutes. And it's, I like it better than other things that took forever. I guess that's kind of how it goes. This is another one that took forever. Just was a lot of ground to cover. I needed to establish the room, these guys behind him, this guy's attitude, his attitude, placement, all that stuff. And so setting that up, got him out of there, back to his car. I didn't get as many chances to draw this car as I'd like. I kind of like drawing, really reflective, cool stuff like that. So got a little bit of a close up there. And then we have him off to the rooftops and everything here. So he's back in his uniform. He's doing superhero stuff. And again, that's one of the things that doing the golden age, vibe thing, lets me do. I can just say, hey, he's over here now. And it lets me, frees up a good part of a page to give you this kind of stuff, which is, you know, I like those Fleischer Brothers cartoons and all that old stuff to do things like that and give you the, the snowy city and the lights and all that nonsense. So that's something I found was there are some tools in those old comics that are really great. It's a shame that they're not used as often because they, I think, let you structure the story in ways that are just better for a reader. And that's one thing I don't really consider myself a writer. Certainly not a writer first. I kind of struggle with that. I'm an artist first. And when I do finally come up with something I think is going to work for a story, once I kind of nail down my I guess objectives, I want to introduce these type of plot questions. I want to cover these types of scenes. I want to have this type of theme and provide this type of experience. Not being a writer, I guess I don't get too hung up in that. I kind of can step back and say, all right, those are my pieces. They're on the table. And how do I want to collect those in a way that's going to be fun for you guys to read? So that's kind of where I approach it. I think like, all right, we've got 4 issues. This is the first one. How much stuff can I put in this one? How much stuff can I put in another issue? What's going to be fun to look at? And what's the right pace to reveal those things? And that's just kind of, I would say, almost planned rather than written. So that's kind of the way I've approached it, and it worked out okay, I think. So we got more stuff here, and he sees this all unfold. He finds out the princess that seemed like the villain was in fact one of the targets. Somebody standing over her. We take this moment for right about when he's going to reveal the villainess, he looks at you and gives you this almost like public service announcement speech about, not to be prejudiced and all that stuff. And that's taken from a lot of those old comics. They would have tons of patriotic stuff. Like you'd think it's almost not as much as you'd remember it being. It's more. Every single issue is democracy this and all that, which is great. I like that stuff. But it's one of those things I thought was probably in every third issue. It's in like every issue. So that dovetailed pretty well with a lot of what I wanted to do. I think it introduces the right amount of what's going on with this character type stuff to it. And so it was fun to do that. And he does that. We reveal that the reporter is in fact the villainess. We see some of these other guys here. This, I think, would have been the Scarlet Twilight uniform had I seen, I think it was an old football uniform. And I look at a lot of stuff like that. In fact, I've been designing some characters for the next Scarlet Twilight sequel, which I'm not sure when I'm going to do it. I might do some August 1st. Kind of depends on how this campaign, which if you want to check out, is in the comments. It collects 1 through 4. If you want to get the hardcover, if you've been keeping up with it, it's going to have just issue 4. You can get the other issues as add-ons wherever you are with the series. If you just checked out 1 and want to come back, if you are just seeing it now, want to check out the whole thing. If you missed a 1 or 2 or 2 or 3, everything's covered, so you can check that out. So that's in the comments. Check it out if you can. These are some of the character designs I've been working on recently for the sequel, and a lot of this I've been looking at old 1930s football uniforms. There's stuff that looks very science fiction-y and superhero-y, but doesn't just look like, because I'm going to need a lot of characters. This is going to be almost a Crisis on Infinite Earths type story, but done in the style of a 1940s comic book. So that's kind of my approach. And I wanted the superhero costumes not to just be all, and there's certainly going to be a lot of this. I didn't want to be a ton of just everybody's a patriotic hero with like the stars and stripes. Not a ton of domino masks, not all like they'd have like these high collars. Didn't want to do a whole lot of that. And what I found as I researched just old stuff, came across these old football uniforms. This is based on I want to say it's the Oklahoma Sooners uniform from the late 20s. And the O has like more of these. I think on their uniform, it's like, it's weird. It almost looks like an 80s or a 70s science fiction-y design. It looks like the logo for OCP from RoboCop or something. but it was kind of like this, and it just was a cool shape. It looked very superhero-y. It worked, so I kind of took that, played with it, simplified it. Um, there are some other uniforms that have these crazy stripes, and I wanted to bring that in. That to me is something that's retro, but I also haven't seen a ton of when you see throwback stuff. You see like those pants with the weird pockets that pilots would wear, stuff like that. So you're going to see a lot of that, but I also kind of wanted to bring something new to it. And these football uniforms kind of gave me that. These two came to them a different way. My wife was playing around with Midjourney last year and fed some inputs from my story into it and got me back this image, which I thought was pretty cool. I said, those are legitimately cool costumes. I want to use those someday. So this one, I almost just took kind of what they had there, with some, obviously some changes, but I could see like where I wanted that to go and thought that would be a cool uniform. And this guy here became this guy here. I'm still playing around with this one. I'm not sure if I love how that's been translated, but something I'm messing around with and have plenty of time, obviously, to get to. I think these two guys are going to be Captain Lancet variants from other universes. We're going to see what makes sense to do, or they might just be other guys. These guys over here are all just other guys that we're going to see in the story. So that's kind of where a lot of that stuff comes from in my design process on it. So back to this. We have this all go on this ritual. One thing there was a show on Netflix. I don't know what it's called. It's called Archive 82 or something like that. And my wife was watching it. And I started in like the third episode and watched the rest of it with her. It was pretty good. But what freaked me out, and this happened, I watched this show came out like a year after issue 1 was released. So I don't think anybody's going to call me on could say I ripped it off. But the way the plot of that revolves around summoning these demons from somewhere, some other dimension, and it literally unfolds exactly like this. The blood, the patterns in the floors, all of it. I was like, oh my God, people are going to think I like copied this unless they've read it beforehand. So I feel pretty lucky that this got out there before that happened. So people know I didn't just copy it. And to get back to this was one of those football uniforms I had seen was this weird stripe and then just a letter. And in fact, I think that was not from a Pinterest board on old football uniforms, but in a comic where Batman or Superman came across some people playing football. And so I was like, man, that's really cool. I wish I could use it, and decided, well, maybe just like the lieutenant of Scarlet Twilight. He has you get further up in the organization, you get the stripes and the S on your chest. You get to have a little bit more status there. So that's what I figured. Anyway, he jumps down. We get another fight scene that, again, I really thank my lucky stars that I could use some of these tools from the Golden Age where you can just, I look at this and think I want to spend the right amount, knowing what's going to come after this. The right amount of time for this fight to last is X amount of panels. There are really good ways for me to do that with some of these things. I can set up, I can kind of narrate, I can go through this and handle it in kind of a montagey way. Because a lot of those old fights they'd be longer than this, but they wouldn't be as beat for beat as you would think, a lot of our modern fight scenes are. So again, great opportunity to just go through a pretty big epic fight. And hopefully it doesn't seem rushed, but I think it seems the right amount of time. I don't think that seeing him punch, 10 other guys, or, maybe they get a couple shots in and back and forth, gives you as a reader anything new here. I mean, we need to see that there was a fight, but we don't really need to. I mean, I think we would just be repeating this 4 more times. So it's something that the style of these old comics let me do, and I'm pretty, like I said, it's pretty cool stuff. Grateful to have that to use. So he wraps that up, turns into his vampire, kind of gives her the same spiel he gave to the doctor, feeds on her. This, I didn't want to be as graphic as it was, but I didn't think there was really any other way to do it. And I knew I wanted to keep you on the action. I couldn't cut away because I'm going to reveal something else is happening off frame. And I did need to zero you in on that stuff. So this got to be, not that I'm sure it's PG-13, but not quite as direct as I like being with that stuff. And so she's laughing like an old Batman villain, calling him a fool. And I kind of make it look like a scene end here, or like this is the end of the issue, and he's reflecting on it, and finds out it's not. Kind of take that panel, mix it up a little bit, and we have this huge hand coming from off the screen, which is this demon she was trying to summon, who it turns out is quite real. His take on it was that, it was all crazy. And that was something I tended to be a little bit funny. I mean, here's a vampire thinking supernatural creatures are all silly except for him, and finds obviously that is not the case. This guy was fun to develop. He came out, I wanted him to look not drawn at all. He's almost completely Photoshop CG together. I wanted him to look like, dude, this is guy from another dimension. He does not belong here. And so everything you see on him is very two-dimensional. It doesn't really change angles when you see him from different angles. My main inspiration there was sort of the Jack Kirby collages from Fantastic Four and stuff. And I don't know, hopefully it worked out pretty well. I like this image. I like this one a lot. These ones I didn't love so much. And but it was fun to really play with the form and say, hey, this stuff's very retro. And then we have this thing coming in that, like I said, obviously just does not belong here at all. And so he talks to him. He decides, he kind of looks at Captain Lance and thinks, what is going on with this guy? And obviously he's from somewhere else. He does not really kind of sees people like ants, and is sort of amused by what this guy's saying, and just decides, all right, put him to sleep. So he tries to resist, but I guess he exerts more power at him, and we get kind of a nice chance to see some of the more mechanical junk back here, which I like doing. But he raises his voice, the word bubble is bigger. He goes off the frame, and that was, I think, a fun thing to do, just to go from small, really enclosed image to bam in your face. At least that was the intention. So then we go from there to time passes, decades upon decades. We see Maxie, but he's got these bolts, which hopefully you wouldn't really notice right away. He's in a hospital of some kind, and we see there's a ton of Maxies, and they all have these bolts in their heads. And they let him know that he is somewhere else, or he's, in a very different set of circumstances than he was. So we end up with this very Art Deco metropolis world. They're still in the Empire State Building, which is where they were. I kind of wanted to say, just establish the sort of cartoon scale, like, hey, we know how big the Empire State Building is. And then, everything else here has risen in the century since and dwarfed it. So that is issue 1, as a kind of walkthrough. So I hope if you are into the creative process, you're watching this later, leave some comments. Let me know what you thought. If you like seeing stuff like this, I kind of like walking through my process, and I've seen other artists do that, writers and artists do that. I've enjoyed it. So thought it would be fun to do the same thing, where we go through all the stuff here and what I was trying to do, what I was setting up. And like I've said, if you think this looks cool, you can check it out and the rest of the story at Zoop right now. The link is in the comments and I think in the description. So I'm going to pop off for now, and I'm going to leave you with the trailer for Scarlet Twilight 4. And thanks, whether you're checking out now or later. Thanks for dropping in. And I will leave you with this. And be sure to check out the campaign, which is live as of today on Zoop.